Hi there, everyone. My name is Dr. James Beck. I am the Chief Scientific Officer at the Parkinsons Foundation. I want to welcome you to yet another expert briefings. Today, we're going to be talking about conversations about complementary therapies and Parkinson's disease. So very excited about this. It's something that our community was interested in. And as you know, we always survey our community trying to come up with the ideas for each expert briefing series. And so this is going to be a good one. Before we begin, I know that many of us are familiar with Zoom, but just want to provide some reminders about what to expect in the Zoom interface that you're experiencing right now. So at the bottom of your screen, there's three different icons, and I'm going to tell you what each of those are for and what they mean. So the chat icon is actually not where you send information to us, it's where we can send some information to you. So in the chat icon, my colleague Danielle we'll be giving you some information, whether it be links to download a PDF or information about what's going on, and you can see that there. And the next spot is the Q&A. This is where you, our Parkinson's community, can ask questions of our speaker, Dr. Natalie Diaz. And if you're coming from Facebook, don't worry, that won't work for you, but you can send questions to us via the comments section in Facebook, and we'll be able to answer those as well. Go forward from that. The next one is something that's relatively new in the Zoom world, and that is the live transcript. So this is a closed captioning-like experience for those of you who may be in a noisy environment and want to hear what's going on. It's computer generated, so take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, what comes through. So it's not perfect, but it can be better than nothing, depending upon what where you are and where you're listening to our presentation. So just a little bit about the foundation for those of you who may be new to us. The Parkinsons Foundation is a nonprofit that's really focused on improving the lives of those living with Parkinson's disease, both through improving care and advancing research. And importantly, everything we do is done in close concert with our community to ensure that our actions are aligned with the needs and priorities of those living with Parkinson's disease. And so we have three main goals that we use to achieve our mission. We're focused on improving care for those living with Parkinson's disease, advancing research towards a cure, and empowering our global community. And I think our expert briefing series nicely fills our objectives here is but one way with which we are there to advance our mission and achieve some of our goals. We're able to do this in part through our sponsors, and I'd like to give a shout out and a thank you to Genentech. So Genentech has provided an unrestricted educational grant to the foundation to support our 2021-2022 expert briefing series. Genentech's a member of the Roche Group, for those of you who may not know. So thank you to them. And then for those of you who really may have not be able to attend the entire one or are coming in late or want to share this with others, this expert briefing, like all our expert briefings, are being recorded, and it should be available in about 1 week. And for those of you who want to download slides and have that ready, my colleague Danielle just put it into the chat, is a link where you can download the slides as a PDF for today's presentation. And then you can have them there in front of you. You can refer to them and come back to them later. So first, I'd like to do a poll just to get to know who our audience is. And so on your screen is a poll. Please fill out whether you're a person with Parkinson's, what's your relationship to Parkinson's disease. And again, if you're in the Facebook line, please feel free to put in the comment section your relationship to PD, whether you're a scientist, a physician, healthcare professional. You've got a family member with Parkinson's. It's helpful to know, and the nice thing is these are live, and so our speaker, Dr. Diaz, can respond to them as appropriate. So we'll leave that up there for just a little while longer, and hopefully we'll get some results in and see where we are. And not surprisingly, most of the people here attending us, 72% are somebody with PD. 13% spouse and partner. And again, as we've always seen, a sizable portion, about 5% of people are healthcare professionals. So thank you for joining our call today, our expert briefing. This should be, I think, very interesting for everybody. So now I'd like to turn over the screen shortly to our presenter, Dr. Natalie Diaz. Dr. Natalie Diaz is a board-certified neurologist with a fellowship training in movement disorders at the Pacific Neuroscience Institute in Torrance, California. So that's just outside LA. Her clinical practices focuses on the evaluation and management of patients with Parkinson's disease, atypical Parkinsonian disorders, Huntington disease, and other choreiform disorders, as well as dystonia and ataxia. She has also specialized training in the evaluation and programming of deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease, essential tremor, and other dystonic disorders. And she also can therapeutically administer botulinum toxin for non-cosmetic indications such as dystonia, hemifacial spasm, and limb spasticity. Her research focuses on industry-sponsored clinical trials in Parkinson's disease and other collaborative clinical projects in the field of neurodegenerative disorders. She's often been a speaker for the foundation and does a fantastic job. So it's really my pleasure to welcome Dr. Diaz to our expert briefing series. Dr. Diaz, I'm going to turn off my camera and turn it over to you, and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to the Parkinsons Foundation for inviting me to come and speak today. I'm going to go ahead and start with a quick poll asking people a little bit about their use of complementary therapies and their comfort level in speaking with their physician. So if everybody could just take a moment to answer these. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everybody there can see my screen a little bit. So just to share the results of the poll, 26% of patients or people that are on today's call share that they do have a conversation with their physicians about complementary therapies, whereas 35 don't. And we'll talk a little bit about that, where that is sort of on the national average. So I'm going to start today's presentation with some typical disclosures and also a disclaimer. As Jim mentioned, I am a clinician, a neurologist, trained in movement disorders, and I spend 80% of my time in the clinic seeing movement disorder patients, the bulk of which is Parkinson's disease. The other, 10% or 20% of my time, I have, over the last decade or longer, been involved in clinical trials with pharmaceutical companies as a multi-site large trials to try to bring new compounds to market. I have in no way ever spoken on behalf of any one product or received monies from companies to speak about their product, or have gotten research monies for independent research. In relation to this talk as well, I receive no monies or have any affiliations with any companies or institutions that work with complementary therapies. So my talk today comes from me being a clinician, working with patients every day and learning about some of these complementary therapies as we go. I am in no way trained in complementary therapies or in integrative medicine, but I learn from this every day. And I always tell my patients, I'm not here to dictate your therapy. I'm here as your advisor and give you recommendations and have discussions about what I know and what you learn. And my patients often know that if they ask me questions that I don't know the answer to, I'm going to go look it up and we'll talk about this, or I'll give you a call back and I'll tell you what you think. So that is my approach for today's talk. So my goal today in discussing complementary therapies is to discuss what are they, how do we define them, what is their appeal. I'll talk a little bit about what I call the good, bad, and the ugly of complementary therapies. And if people are considering using them, what should you be thinking about? So let's start first with definitions. So the National Institute of Health defines complementary therapies as those products and practices that are outside of what we call mainstream traditional medications or therapies. So these are usually not prescription products or practices by the doctors, but they're taking alongside traditional therapies. So they complement traditional medicine and taken alongside. This is different from what we call alternative therapies, where people forego traditional medicine or push off taking traditional medicine and take them instead of. And as we become more comfortable using these therapies, as the scientific medical community and the patient community learns more about these products, they start becoming more studied by the scientific community, and we learn more about their efficacy, their use, and their safety. We're seeing more a trend to what we call integrative medicine. And that's where practicing providers actually bring these two worlds together and use both traditional medicines and complementary therapies. And doctors now, it's being more incorporated into medical schools, and it's now a certified area of medicine where people can get certified fellowship training in integrative medicine. So it's a very important thing because this is a huge sort of topic that's taking over. In this country alone, the global market is over $80 billion in this last couple of years in the use of complementary therapies. It's projected that by 2027, 2028, it's going to be globally a more than $300 billion industry. So it is very important for doctors in the scientific community to know about this. We're seeing more and more patients that feel comfortable with this. We definitely see that studies have shown that there's geographic differences in the use of these therapies. So in America, there tends to be more of a use of vitamins and dietary supplements, herbs and botanicals. In Europe and Scandinavia, there tends to be more a preference for body-based practices such as acupuncture, yoga, massage. And in Asian and African countries, there has been always been sort of a pull more towards their traditional sort of medical systems that incorporate a little bit of all these practices, herbs, botanicals, foods, as well as some of the body practices. So there definitely is sort of a geographic preference. In terms of Parkinson's disease, there have been a couple of studies that have shown somewhere from 30 to 40% of patients with Parkinson's in this country use complementary therapies. More in other countries, tends to be more women than men as users, consumers of these products. And we definitely see that there's a socioeconomic difference too. The higher the socioeconomic level, the more use of these therapies as well. Interestingly, there are several surveys published that more than half of Americans don't consult their treating doctors when they're taking these therapies or before taking these therapies. And it's very important because, doctors are sort of getting more comfortable with this. There's a lot of doctors now that actively practice this, and still there are doctors that are reluctant to discuss this and see this as a threat to traditional medicine. But the literature on this is kind of all over the place. So, in academic centers, there was this interesting study published back in 2006 from the Mayo Clinic surveying, doctors of all specialties. And back then they found that only a quarter of doctors actually discussed complementary and alternative therapies with their patients. Only about a quarter of doctors actually talked about the potential risks and harms of complementary therapy. But all of those that did say they had conversations, they said that the conversation was initiated by the patient. So it's very important because, not all doctors feel comfortable talking about this, so they won't bring it up. But most doctors these days, I think if you bring up the conversation, are willing to at least say, I don't know, but, here are some resources, or I'll go look it up, or I've heard of that. And it's a discussion because, it's very important, as I'll go on to talk about, these therapies can have their drawbacks. They also can have their interaction with medications that other medications that people take. And it's very important for people to be informed consumers when they're considering taking these. Another study that was actually published in 2020, and this one looked more at community physicians. It found that more than 50% of physicians were recommending complementary therapies. Again, more female physicians than male physicians, but it tended to be more in primary care specialties where doctors were more comfortable discussing these as opposed to specialists. So it is definitely a growing trend where physicians are becoming more comfortable, not only discussing it, but recommending some of these therapies. So why do people seek these therapies? Well, there have been a number of studies that have tried to look at it, and there's a myriad of reasons, I'm sure, why people seek complementary and alternative therapies. A lot of the studies have shown people really are looking for more benefit from therapies. A lot of people may be dissatisfied with the traditional medication they're getting. And I think as all physicians that treat Parkinson's disease, I understand that. I mean, we have medications that are purely symptomatic at this point. They can be really good for some people, especially in the early part of the disease, and really get people's functionality improved, mobility improved, but it doesn't work as well for other people. They can have a lot of side effects for people. And over time, they can lose their effect, needing to take them more frequently or have some long-term complications. So I understand the dissatisfaction that we have available in our traditional medications. So we do have an arsenal of medications these days. We have more than 20 medications that are available for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And we pick and choose them depending on the individual, but they're very imperfect medications. Other reasons that people seek these complementary therapies, a sense of empowerment. You know, it's a sense of I'm doing something for myself rather than something that, you know, is coming from the medical world. So, you know, these are all things that most of us understand why people seek. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of complementary therapies. So the good is, you know, these therapies tend to inspire a sense of wellness for people. They're positive feeling. They probably do provoke a sense of a placebo response, a sense of reward. They tend to look at and focus on treating the whole person. So not just focused on the symptom that somebody's having or the condition. They're looking at trying to address the person as a whole, their mental, their emotional, their spiritual, their physical. And that's very appealing to people. And we talk about it, you know, these therapies trying to focus on some of the body processes that are thought to go away in a lot of conditions, inflammation, antioxidant, you know, oxidative stress, the buildup of proteins, gut problems. So, you know, these are things that are general things that are affected in many conditions. And these therapies try to focus on those mechanisms rather than one condition. And it does give people a sense of empowerment. You know, they do the research. They talk to other people about it. They, you know, gives people a sense of I'm in control. So, you know, it makes people feel good. So that's the good of complementary therapy. And to be honest, most of these, if they're taken, you know, in moderate doses, they're used with, you know, practitioners that know what they're doing, and people do their research and understand, you know, the medications that they're taking alongside. Most of these have relatively few potential risks and side effects. So that's the good thing. And a lot of them can be very useful for things that a lot of people, not just with Parkinson's experience, but problems with sleep, problems with nausea, constipation. They help reduce stress. So these are good things that we get from complementary therapies. The bad thing is that unfortunately, as you'll hear me talk about today, we have not been able to prove these really in human studies. There's a lot of support, lacking evidence and research support that we have as clinicians to say, yes, absolutely, you should go do that because the studies really point us this way. So as clinicians, we're always sort of like, you know, yes, you know, let's talk about the pros and cons. I don't have a lot of research evidence to say you should definitely do that, but you know, most of them, as I mentioned, have low risk. They can be costly. This is a big business. So some of these supplements, herbs, practices can be costly. Most of them are not covered under the insurance because these are not considered drugs. They're not considered, supplements. Herbs and vitamins and dietary supplements are not really regulated by any body. The FDA doesn't really follow them. And so there's always the question of labeling, that what it says on the label, is that truly what you're getting in the bottle? And that's pure? Is it no impurities in there, other things? There have been reports of, people selling things that when then there's an investigation, there's absolutely nothing of the product. And I think a lot of the large retailers, Target, Walgreens, a number of others, got in trouble for selling supplements a number of years back that had zero or very little of what was in the bottles. And now a lot of those companies use third-party companies to vet the supplements that they're selling. So there's some quality of assurance there. But a lot of products that people get online, you don't really know what you're getting or whether it's safe. These herbs and supplements also, they use the same metabolic systems that drugs do. So they're metabolized by the liver, the kidneys, and different processes in the blood. So if people are on prescription medications that use those same metabolic processes, there can be interaction. So if you're taking an herb that's metabolized by the same liver enzyme that your blood thinner is or your cardiac medication is, then there's the possibility that it could increase or decrease the effectiveness of those prescription medications that you're on. So that's an important reason why you should do your research and discuss these with your physician, because if you're on a blood thinner that is there to prevent clots, and you're on one of these therapies that could decrease the effectiveness of the clot or increase your risk of bleeding, that can be very dangerous. And also there isn't a lot of reporting of, side effects and toxicities with these. Again, because it's not regulated, when drugs go through this approval process, it's mandatory that they log in adverse effects and toxicities, whereas these are nutritional supplements, herbs, practices, there's no requirement to log in toxicities. And so, when you're looking at the data and people take advantage of this, there is this sort of real imbalance of a lot of data of toxicities and side effects with pharmaceuticals and a lack of data the other, because people aren't reporting, there's no requirement. And people take advantage of that and say, hey, look at the difference in toxicities. And that's what I call the ugly of this, because people take companies, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and when we don't have a lot of scientific support, where there isn't a lot of regulation, and there is a need for people to find things that work, there are companies and institutions that unfortunately take advantage of this and make false claims of things being curative for Parkinson's, really been proven to slow down the process in humans, portray traditional medicines as toxic, and these other alternative or complementary therapies as the cure. And I can assure you, and the scientific and medical community will tell you, we have not been able to prove anything yet that is curative for Parkinson's or truly, with a lot of scientific evidence, neuroprotective. So, companies have gotten in trouble across this country for making these false claims, and people have to be very careful with that. Now, I understand there is interest in this in the scientific community. We don't deny that there is potential for these all these practices to help Parkinson's. There are a lot of things that we see in the brain of Parkinson's disease where these complementary therapies mechanistically could be of use. In the brain of Parkinson's, we see inflammation, we see oxidative stress and the formation of free radicals. We see the powerhouse cells in the brain and the body called the mitochondria. There's problems in functioning. There's a buildup of abnormally folded proteins. There's poor communication between the brain and other systems, especially now the gut. And then with all this going on, neurochemicals go awry, and there's certain chemicals that become upregulated and cause more damage. And so mechanistically, complementary therapies are meant to try to help with that. And a lot of these therapies have in the lab or in animal models of Parkinson's disease proved that they do have an effect in those sort of systems. We just haven't been able to prove it in human trials as of yet, or have had very inconsistent sort of results. And I understand why there's this promise and there's this real kind of look to that, because our traditional medicines really just affect here. They're really just trying to help the symptoms once all this has taken their toll and we're having a low level of neurochemicals because the brain cells have atrophied and we're trying to supplement all these neurochemicals. So there's still a lot of promise for these therapies, but we're still in the really early stages and people have to be careful. So why is research so hard? Well, the truth is we don't quite know yet what causes Parkinson's disease. We see all these changes in the brain, but we don't know if these changes are the cause of or the result of another injury. We don't know if we just hit one process or do we have to hit them all across the board. You know, if it's one of these therapies that only work as an antioxidant or as an antioxidant inflammatory, is that enough to turn the car around and make sure that we can stop this? And then when they do show effect in the lab or in animal models, very often, and this is the same case that we have with pharmaceuticals, it doesn't translate to human trials. And that's because we're much more complex animal than rats or monkeys. We also think there's a lot of variability in people, genetically, what they come across in their lifetime, symptoms, and maybe even in their brain processes. So there's always been this idea in the scientific community, when things fail, are we just not looking at this right? Would it fail for everybody, or there are certain groups of people that could actually benefit from some of these products, but maybe not everybody would benefit? We also don't know if we're studying Parkinson's very well. We have crude ways to rate changes in motor function and people's symptoms, but maybe that's not across the board the best way to do it. And we don't have a specific blood test or imaging tool or other type of biomarker that we can say that we can follow effectively for changes in Parkinson's to help us in these trials. There is with such a big sort of research engine in this country, there is a lack of interest in studying these. So, when we talk about limited funding, it goes for practices, private companies go for things that they can patent and make money for and bring to market. And unfortunately, natural products can't be marketed. And so they kind of fall to the wayside by private companies. And when there's limited funding for investigators that are interested, a lot of funding gets shifted to pharmaceuticals. Now, the National Institute of Health, a couple of decades ago, sort of saw this growing trend, saw the sort of interest in it, both from the scientific community as well as the patient population, and they developed the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. They are responsible for trying to, generate funding and have an idea of where the federal government and government funding agencies want to target in some of these therapies. So every 5 years, they come up with a strategic plan of how best to move the science needle forward in these sort of therapies. Then they got renamed as the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. And they also do a lot on the patient side. So they have in their web portal something that's called Know the Science to help patients learn about what do we mean by evidence-based medicine? How do you vet a study that talks about, benefit in use of some of these therapies? What should you be looking for in these studies? Like how many patients are in it? Is a placebo being used? Is it vetted by peers? Is it thrown out to the scientific community to see if it truly is a good effect? And there's also something that's called the Herbalist. So it's still rudimentary. I sometimes use it, but it's a mobile app that can be downloaded on your phone. And it's got a list of popular herbs that people can look at. It talks a little bit in general, not Parkinson's. What are the herbs and how they've been looked at, and what are some of the potential safety and toxicity issues that people should be aware of. So all those are available for patients. Now let's focus a little bit on complementary therapies. So the National Institute of Health kind of breaks it up into 5 categories, and there can be a lot of overlay between them. We talk about biologically based therapies. These are herbs, vitamins, dietary supplements, and foods that are thought to play a role in sort of medicinal therapy. There are mind and body techniques, things like biofeedback, meditation, relaxation techniques, guided imagery. These are, self-taught and self-administered most of the time. Manipulative and body-based methods. These look at things with a practitioner who does these massage or chiropractic manipulation, reflexology, and whole body vibration. And then we talk about energy therapies. These are more in sort of ancient traditional medicines with the idea of balancing energy within the body and its symbiosis with energy in our environment. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the alternative medical systems that kind of use a little bit of all of these. So I'm going to talk a little bit about biologically based therapies, and I'm not going to focus on just one because I think it would take up the bulk of this talk and really spread out into multiple talks. I can say this is probably what Americans focus most on is vitamins and dietary supplements and functional foods. And there's been a number of studies that have looked at these. As I mentioned, mechanistically, they make sense. A lot of them have antioxidant properties. They have anti-inflammatory properties. Some of these have shown in animal studies that help with dissolving or preventing of some of these abnormal protein clumps that we see in the brains of Parkinson's disease, or help maybe with the communication of the brain with other body systems. So mechanistically, and sometimes in the lab or in the animals, we see that this could possibly work. Unfortunately, for a lot of these, we have not had consistent positive results. A few of them in early studies with humans, coenzyme Q10, creatine, vitamin E, and even glutathione, those are the ones that have probably been the most studied, did show some early results in humans that were positive. But as they were more studied and more effectively studied with placebo response, with bigger groups of people, the research evidence just didn't pan out, or we got mixed reviews. And so at this point, the medical community can't, with good sort of science behind us, really recommend it. Now, having said that, most of these that I put up here are pretty safe to use if people are using them. It is always important for people to make sure where they're sourcing them from. And I put here, a couple of things that people need to be worried about. So one of the big risks, as I mentioned earlier, was, can blood thinners, people that are on aspirin, Plavix, and blood thinners, some of these can interact with these vitamins. They can interact with other medications as well. Some of them can cause side effects as well: facial flushing, nausea, dizziness, headaches. A few of them can also affect if you're on cholesterol medications that are also, act on the liver. So it's very important to understand sort of the potential side effects and toxicities of some of these vitamins. But I think most of us feel that if people want to try them, they want to spend the cost, they know the potential side effects, and are taking them reasonably, meaning they're not taking whopping doses, but they understand the pros and the cons. I think most of us in the medical community are like, okay, and let's see how you feel. The same thing with herbs and botanicals, or what we call phytochemicals. And these have probably been less well studied than vitamins and dietary supplements. They've been around for millennia that people have used them. So these are things that a lot of the ancient medical systems tend to use. And there's been a lot of interest over the years in ginkgo biloba, curcumin, which comes from turmeric, different forms of ginseng, which most commonly in this country is Asian ginseng that we're using, the Camellia sinensis plant, which forms depending on which part of the plant is being used. Black, green, and oolong teas come from. And then there's a number of other, herbs and botanicals, and none of these are exhaustive lists of things that I've heard people trying. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of evidence. Some of them have never been studied. Some of them have been studied very erratically. Some of them have not had placebo groups with them. Some of them have shown mild benefit in different things, cognitive function, sleep, gastrointestinal things. They just haven't been studied in a consistent way, with the right preparations consistently and the doses consistently with placebo groups. So for us as scientists and clinicians, we have a hard time unless we have proof really recommending. But like I said, if people understand the potential side effects that they should be looking for, potential risks with some of the medications that they're taking, and really isolate, I'm going to take this, let's see how I feel, and I'm going to get it from a reputable source. Most of us are like, okay, let's go ahead and try it and let's see how you feel. Because as I mentioned, the studies that have been done, there are patients that feel better. And if you look at all the blogs and the patient websites, people do feel better with these therapies. So, if people want to give them a try, as long as they understand the lack of good evidence, but also understand the potential side effects and toxicity. And as physicians, if we understand that most of these, can possibly help, we just can't prove them, then I'm all for these most of the time. I'm going to talk a little bit about Macona because this is one that is very popular with people. This is a legume that's actually found in tropical and subtropical areas of the world, especially the desert plains of India. It is a legume where the seeds of the legume actually contain levodopa. It's the precursor to dopamine. And roughly, again, and it's not a precise science, they have anywhere from 5 to 10% of levodopa in the seeds. This has been used as part of Ayurvedic, medicine, a traditional medicine system for millennia. And actually, there's a lot of literature on people using this for a number of medical conditions, as it's thought to have antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, maybe even work with diabetes, maybe work as an antidepressant. So definitely, documented in ancient texts of its help on what sounds like Parkinson's disease. It has been studied, so not a tremendous amount of literature out there, that good literature, but it has been studied. And in a couple of good studies that looked at single doses compared to traditional levodopa, it may actually kick in faster than traditional levodopa, may have more of a stable effect than levodopa, may even last longer than levodopa without necessarily kicking up as much dyskinesia in people that have that propensity. Unfortunately, a few studies that have looked at more longer term use of Macona have shown that people do run into potential side effects, the same ones we see with levodopa: dizziness, nausea, gastrointestinal issues. And, and some of the studies show that a good percentage of patients stop just because it worsened their motor function. So, it's complicated using Macona because we don't know yet. While in the moment it can be really good, we don't know yet from the long term. People usually require more levodopa as the years go on. How good it is at sort of keeping up with patients' symptoms, how to titrate it to patients' symptoms. There's a lack of evidence of that. And what are some of the long-term side effects of being on Macona? We also have to make sure that people don't go out and eat the seeds or even the extract. The extract can be very potent as well. Most of these are boiled, they're roasted, they're cooked so that the percentage that you're getting is a lower percentage. And then a lot of people use the powder, which people can then weigh and get a better idea of how much levodopa they're getting in. But again, it's not well regulated, so we don't know that exact content. It can vary from the source that people are getting. It also can interact. So if patients are taking diabetes medications or antidepressants, it can interact with those and can also lower blood pressure, just like levodopa does. So people do have to be careful. I'm going to talk a little bit about cannabinoids because that is something that comes up a lot in my discussions in clinic. Now, cannabinoids are one group of hundreds of substances that we find in the cannabis sativa plant. There are more than 100 cannabinoids that are known. The cannabis sativa plant is known as marijuana. That's where the dried plant is called marijuana. The main cannabinoid that we find in this cannabis sativa plant is tetrahydrocannabinol, THC. This is the one that has the psychoactive, no, I'm not going to say psychoactive, euphoric effects that make people feel high, as opposed to cannabidiol, which is CBD. This is still psychoactive, but it tends to be more of a calming effect rather than causing euphoria and a high. There's a couple of other cannabinoids that are gaining in popularity. There's cannabinol, there's cannabidiol, cannabinidiol. I'm stuttering on those, but these are also gaining. These are usually less potent forms of THC that are becoming more available. And it's a loaded political subject because, you know, CBD products, because they don't cause euphoria, because they don't cause psychoactive, you know, highs. They tend to be available in most states in this country. Legally, they need to have 0.3% or less of THC to be able to be legally available in this country. THC products, containing products, are still legally guarded as Schedule I products. And, you know, people need to have a medical use to be able to use these. Parkinson's disease in a lot of states can be something that people can apply for. Physicians unfortunately can't prescribe for it, but can help in the process if people meet that criteria. It is approved for certain medical uses, seizures, in cancer, chemotherapy, nausea, vomiting, and weight loss, and HIV and AIDS. And there are small studies using these products. Again, not very well done studies, but have shown improvement in anxiety, depression, pain, and maybe even help sleep. In the realm of Parkinson's disease, there have been a couple of decent trials that have looked at its effect in Parkinson's disease. They have shown some mild benefit, some have shown no benefit. And pooling them together, we really yet don't have much direction, because what happens is there's varying compounds that are used. There are small studies. Some of them don't have real good placebo-controlled groups. So while there's promise in these, we still don't know. The consensus is we still don't know how well they work, and long-term how they do with Parkinson's disease. So, you know, there's always safety concerns that I talk about with my patients. One is we usually don't recommend that people vape these products, especially products that have THC, because they can cause lung injury. There's problems with absorption and effect in edibles. You know, these edibles take a while to get their effect. And so sometimes people keep taking more because they don't quite feel the effect right away. And with the constipation of Parkinson's, where, you know, these products stay in the gut for a while, all of a sudden that effect kicks it in one time and can be toxic. So people have to be careful with edibles, and especially with Parkinson's. These cannabinoids and cannabis-related products do use the liver as their metabolism, so they can interact with other medications as well. And they can also be associated with side effects. They can lower blood pressure, cause fatigue, dizziness, mood or cognitive changes, especially with THC. But there's some data that suggests that even with CBD, some people can have cognitive changes because they can have sedating effects. They can affect balance and hallucinations. Again, we don't have a great governing control over these products. So people, especially CBD products, people can get online and different places, and there's nobody to regulate the quality or the labeling of what you're getting. There have been shown to be contaminants in some of these products, microorganisms, pesticides from growing these, and other toxic substances within these, and some of these that are sold online. And there's no good regulation that, you know, what's the right content of cannabinoid, and somebody's following this. The Parkinsons Foundation came out with a consensus statement back in 2020 that talks a little bit about this. Some of the limitations we have had as physicians, as well as the scientific community, what we know. And right now, you know, most of us just can't promote it. But again, it's accessible to patients. So it's a discussion that I always have. And I have a number of physicians that feel more comfortable with it. I have people that dabble in this, that know better the dosing and sort of the different products that are available for purity and safety. And so, you know, it's good to talk to your physicians, because some people are gaining a lot of interest and expertise in this. There's a number of other useful supplements that I sometimes recommend in my clinic. I use a lot of melatonin to help with sleep onset insomnia and dream enactment, what we call the REM sleep behavior problem in Parkinson's. Chamomile teas or extracts can be very useful for helping people sleep, can help a little bit with anxiety. Passion flower, both in the tea and the extract, can also help with that. There's also valerian root that again has been used for millennium, but can also have some side effects. Ginger can help, whether tea or oral, can help with things like, diarrhea, heartburn, indigestion. Peppermint oil as well. Flaxseed or flaxseed oil. I use flaxseed every day. I put it in my oatmeal. Can help with constipation and has some antioxidant effects. So, some of these can be useful, but again, you have to be careful with these. And cranberry extract, this is something that's been looked at, can sometimes help in those people that have a tendency towards recurrent urinary tract infections, sometimes can help with that. So I'm going to pivot a little bit because I see that I'm running out of time. This is an area, the mind-body practices, where I'm a big proponent on. I practice this myself. And this is where these are practices that people can self-teach themselves. They practice, they can do them as part of a bigger group or social go to practitioners that do it, but they can be free, they can be self-taught. And this is where we train our mind to be more conscious of our body. And we use mental focus, we use deep breathing, we use imagery to sort of help us in reducing stress, feeling more in tune with our body. And there have been studies that have shown that mindfulness meditation, yoga, Tai Chi can actually be very useful for things like stress relief, relaxation, improving anxiety, improving sleep. So these are all practices that people should be doing, and I'm a big proponent of these. Things like Tai Chi, also some other medical communities have been suggesting as part of, say, like a pain program. The American Academy of Rheumatology actually recommends Tai Chi as part of a larger plan to help with osteoarthritic pain, especially knee pain, that Tai Chi can be very useful for that. Qigong is something similar to Tai Chi, again, where we use slower, less intense body movements, but a lot of deep breathing to help with that. And again, there's some growing interest and evidence showing that these can be very useful for some of those body sort of feelings. Manipulative and body-based practices are a little bit different. These take a practitioner that does these, but there is some evidence that some of these can help with similar things: stress reduction, pain relief, anxiety, things like osteopathic practices, especially craniosacral therapy, where there's pressure points that are stretched and pressed on, especially at the occipital cranial area and the lower back, where these can have some relief of pain and stress. Massage as well. Again, we don't have a lot of evidence for massage, but again, if people are going to reputable places that are clean and they're doing gentle massage, there is some evidence that it does help with things like muscle tension, neck and back pain, may even help circulation. Whole body vibration also. A lot of physical therapy studios use vibrational therapy. There are some studies that they may help with some of the physical motor symptoms of Parkinson's, at least temporarily, and can also help with gait and motor function. So there are physical therapy studios that use vibrational therapy, either focal in certain body parts, or their machines where people can stand on, and a few minutes of vibrational therapy. Unfortunately, the studies have been sort of inconsistent with it, but some people really do feel that it helps along with other therapies. Energy therapies are part of more of a traditional, cultural therapies. One that, always I get a lot of questions about and interest is acupuncture. And acupuncture has actually been studied. I mean, there are studies that show that in animal models, acupuncture can actually be helpful in these animal models. And we don't really know why, what the mechanism is. The idea of, from a traditional cultural standpoint, is that we have a body force called ki that kind of flows through our body. I think it's chi actually, that flows through our body through channels, what we call meridians. And this actually, when there's disease or there's conditions, there's blockages of flow of our energy force. And so acupuncture is, specified points that help release some of these blockages. Unfortunately, there's been studies in humans and the results have been sort of mixed. The ones that have actually been done with a sham procedure with a placebo group did show that there is a big placebo effect. And looking at all the literature collectively, the AAN in 2006, that's the American Academy of Neurology, and then the Movement Disorder Society in 2015 kind of pooled all these studies and felt, we really can't recommend it. The study, criteria, the evidence is just not strong enough. But, most of us feel that if patients want to give it a try, as long as they're going to a place that's clean and is reputable, there's not a lot of drawback in trying these therapies. And I definitely have had patients that feel that it has helped, whether it's pain or whether it's just a sense of feeling better. If people want to try these, I think most of the medical community will say, it's okay. There's other therapies, what we call touch therapies. There's been no significant studies done in Parkinson's disease. There have been some limited studies that have done in general in different conditions or in people in general that may help with stress, pain relief, and mood. And this is the practice where people kind of either use light therapy or they use touch or hovering their hands over people with this idea that there's a force that helps people feel better. Traditional medical systems, these are things like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. These have been used for millennia, and most of them do cover a mix of herbs and botanicals and some of these mind and body practices and manipulative practices. And a lot of people, outside of this country, the Asian countries, people have been using these for a long time. And there is something to it in the studies. We just have not been able to prove it. Native American culture also has their practice, traditional practice. This involves a combination of prayer, healing touch, use of herbs, teas, tinctures, and rituals, which some people feel has been helpful. So I'm going to end there, and just in summary, in a few key points. When we talk about complementary therapies, these are defined as natural products and practices that can be taken alongside traditional medicines. I usually don't recommend that people forego therapy if they need it. Now, many times I have patients that come to me, they don't quite need medicine yet, or they're sort of at that cusp and they want to try it. And they're like, I don't feel that I'm ready for medicine yet. And sometimes I'll say, okay, go ahead. I agree with you. You're still doing everything you need to do. You're not really suffering too much. Let's go ahead and try it and see if it changes the course. What I hate to see is sometimes when patients are really suffering, having to pull away from work, having to pull away from family functions, because they're not doing well, but they're so anti-medicine that they look for these. And unfortunately, for all the drawbacks that we have from pharmaceuticals, there is no doubt that they have helped people over the 50 years that they have been in use. If we look at the natural history studies, before we developed levodopa and after we developed levodopa, most patients with Parkinson's can live almost a normal sort of lifespan with Parkinson's. And it's usually not Parkinson's that is the fatal flaw. It's, some of the complications that people can have with Parkinson's. But again, there's no doubt that pharmaceuticals can help. And I hate to see people forego it. We do have, most of us understand these have promise. They do have promise. Mechanistically, they have promise. They have shown some data in animal models, but we just don't have a lot of great data in human for us as scientists and clinicians to say, absolutely, go give it a try, because this is what it shows. But it is a conversation that you should have with your physicians, because most people, I think most people in the medical community are open to it. If we don't know about it, we'll go read about it. And it should be a conversation that we have, not a yes or a no, but a conversation with us advising you what are the pluses and what are the minuses of using these. In general, most of these, as I mentioned, have relatively few potential risks and toxicities if you're trying to get them from a reputable source. I usually recommend that people really try to go to, naturopaths or physicians that practice integrative medicine, or really go to do the research and try to find, some of the larger brand name companies like Target, Walmart, or all those now use third party companies that try to vet the supplements that they're selling, so there's some assurance of quality that they're getting, or at least of content. And always remember that just because it's natural does not mean that it's safe. These therapies can have their side effects, they can have their toxicity, they can interact with other medications that you're taking, and even with each other. Herbs can interact with each other and with other vitamins. They're not regulated, and so you don't always know that you're getting is quite what you're getting. But what can you do? Just always be aware that there is no miracle cure out there right now for Parkinson's. We're working on it, both on the complementary and the pharmaceutical side. But there is nothing yet that we have been able to say with good evidence that cures Parkinson's or significant slows it down. Some people do get benefit from these. So I don't rule them out. It is very important for you to talk to your healthcare providers about these. And always remember, if you're going to try them, do your research, talk to your physicians, and do one therapy at a time. So you can isolate if you have side effects. It's the same thing I always tell my patients with therapies, with traditional therapies. Let's do one thing at a time, because if we throw too many things into the recipe and something goes wrong, we don't know which one is the culprit. We don't know which one caused the problem. Always check for verification. So there are a couple of companies that will put their verification on the labels that they've vetted sort of the quality and the purity and the content. The federal government has something that's called the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. You can go onto their website and they have discussions about vitamins and herbs. There's something called Consumer Labs. This is a nonprofit separate company that tries to look at the quality and content of some of these herbs and dietary supplements. And then there's the NSF International. So some of these supplements that you'll read out there have this on their label, which give an extra label of an extra level of security that what you're getting might be more honest than something that you buy on the internet that doesn't have that. And these are some of the useful resources that are available to people to learn more.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diaz. That was a fantastic presentation. You really covered a tremendous amount of material here. And for someone who says they're not an expert, I think you certainly are pretty close to doing. You gave certainly did justice to this this subject area. A lot of questions have come in, but one of the ones I just want to start off with at the top, because you mentioned, just for clarity for our listeners, you mentioned sometimes traditional medicine. I think you're referring to like medicine you practice, American style medicine, Western medicine, versus the cultural based, which some people often think is traditional medicine too. So is that correct understanding?
Yeah, I apologize, because that term is used for both, right? So conventional medicine, I guess, is a better term for it, right? It's the convention that we have in our medical treatment in this country, which is through a doctor prescription, most of them. So that's what we call conventional medicine, sometimes referred to as traditional medicine. But that term, as you mentioned, is also used for tradition, cultural tradition, right? So a lot of countries outside of this, outside of the US, in Asia and Africa, and even parts of Europe, there are, supplements and foods and herbs that have been used and, passed down for generations as useful for treatment of ailments. And so, yes, I talk about culturally traditional therapies as opposed to more conventional medical treatment.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, as I mentioned, lots of questions coming in, and I just checking time. I know we're almost at the top of the hour, but I think you said you could stay for a little while longer. So I appreciate that. And for those of you who may have to sign off, this is recorded, so you can always come back and catch the Q&A afterwards as part of that. So if you've been listening to this, and there was a number of people who didn't really know what complementary therapies are, and now their interest has been piqued, how do they go about trying to find someone to talk with about complementary therapies? Should they go to their doctor first? Is there a complementary therapy doctor that they should consider? Do you find those who specialize in PD? What would be the first step you would recommend for someone who's listened to this and says, I'm willing to, to see if some of this may help as part of the overall care for my Parkinson's?
Right, absolutely. So I don't tell people to go out there and reinvent the wheel and go out and get themselves a whole new set of doctors to treat their condition. I would always first start, if you have a good relationship with your doctor, that's always the first place to start, is talk to your doctor, right? As you saw, I highlighted some of the problems that can come with these, right? Toxicities, potential side effects, interaction with medications. It is always very important for your doctors to know that, because they're writing your prescriptions. If you're taking something that's counteracting with a medicine that they're giving you, and there's a complication and they don't know what you're taking, it's very important to know that. So I always start my day when I'm meeting patients for the first time, or even when I'm seeing them in follow-up. I always tell them, okay, what are the medications you're taking? What are the changes in your medications? Are there any new supplements or supplements that you're thinking of talking about? So knowing that this is a growing trend, think you're going to see more and more doctors sort of asking those. And when you check in, they're always asking you to put down everything that you take, because you may not know if it's important or not, but it could be important. So always start first with the physicians that you already have and try to have that conversation. Of course, there's physicians with all level of knowledge and comfort with things, right? So sometimes you will come across physicians. Traditionally, we're not trained in this. You will come across physicians that say, I wouldn't take that. Or, I know nothing about it. And so then you're left with, well, where do I go? Well, there's some useful resources for you to do your research that I mentioned. There's fellowship training. So there's institutes of integrative medicine where doctors can get fellowship training, and some of those have listings of integrative medicine doctors, right? Most of them are primary care, right? So most of them are primary care doctors, but there are specialists as well that take that a little bit further, and try to bring these two worlds together. So first start with your own doctor, then start with, some of these national sort of organizations of integrative medicine, the NIH, different things that give you more information and things for you to learn yourself, but also to help identify. And also ask your doctor. I have, colleagues that I work with that, in certain things are much more well-versed in things like this. And so I dole out to other doctors. I have emergency room and internists that feel really comfortable with CBD products, with Macona, all that. And I am by far an expert in these. I will dole out and say, I really can't tell you too much, but I do have colleagues that work in that. Let me give you a referral, or let me give you their contact information.
Okay, that's fantastic. So if your doctor is, not, as one listener said, dismissive of this approach, is it worth, going out on your own, as you said, trying to establish these relationships? But even then, you should always be telling them what you're taking, just so that they know.
Absolutely. You don't necessarily, sometimes you have a good relationship with your doctor on other terms, and you think that they're a wonderful doctor, but maybe that doctor just doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't know too much. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to go changing your doctor, but you have to be in control of your own ship. We're there to help guide you on the road, but ultimately, you have to be aware that there can be problems with this. And so your team needs to know everything you're on it. It's okay if they don't approve. It's okay if they don't, but I need to tell you what I'm on so that you're aware. And then a discussion. And if they don't feel comfortable or they don't know, other physicians or other providers, then like I said, there are accessible resources through some of the national organizations and some of the government websites that have listings of people that do have more training in that.
Fantastic. So um, I've gone through this process, and I want to take some of these complementary approaches, especially with the biologically based ones. How, supplements and herbs and whatnot, things you would probably ingest. How long would you expect to see some effects? When would you say, like, this isn't really working out? Is it just a matter of people will know it's not worth the effort, because it does sound like this is a little bit of really on the cutting edge of things, where for those early adopters of like technology, things don't work quite as you expect, and you have to do a lot more fiddling. It's not going to be turnkey, and so it requires a lot more effort on the behalf of the patient, the person with Parkinson's who's doing this. So, what do you advise on somebody who says, I'm going to try this, and you say, well, yeah, you should try, a couple weeks or a couple months. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to pharmaceuticals, right? I mean, people, if they want to try them, you try them, right? You give it a little bit of time. Now, side effects, most of the time you're going to feel first, right? So those are things that you always have to keep in the back of your mind. Know what you're taking. What are the potential risks? Like I said, always vet out yourself, or definitely with your physician. Am I on medications that are going to interact with something that I want to try? That's the first and foremost thing to do. Is this appropriate for me to try? Then if I'm going to try it, as I mentioned on one of my slides, do one thing at a time. And it's the same thing with pharmaceuticals. Like I said, if you throw too much into your recipe and you don't feel well, or you have some toxicity, we don't know. You might have lost out on something potentially good because we aren't able to sort out which one was the culprit, right? So if you're going to change something, always change one thing at a time. So I have patients that dabble in Macona, dabble in CBD, dabble in these. And, we have this discussion. I think maybe you need a little bit more levodopa. I want to try this first. Okay, well, let's just do one. Let's do one, and we talk about the pros and cons of both. And if we decide we're going to do the, complementary therapy adjustment first, we do that, and we'll leave the traditional medications the same, because, we want to see how this works. And ideally, you want to give it some time. Like if you looked at some of these processes that the complementary therapies are trying to get at, right? These inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in sort of your stress level, pain, all that. It's not going to be immediate, so you do have to stick with them as long as you're feeling okay. I usually say give them a couple weeks, couple of months, if financially it's feasible. Some of these are not cheap, right? So you have to take that into account too when you're balancing this. And I definitely don't recommend that people waste a fortune, or their savings on these, but if they're financially feasible and people really want to give them a try. So like medicines, you have to really give them a few weeks, maybe even a few months, to see if you know some effect. Some of these effect, again, we don't know. That's the problem. We don't know without them being properly studied. These studies that we do are very short-lived. There's no way that we follow these supplements for months and years. Could it have an effect of something that you're taking now and you take it for a couple of years? Then maybe we look back then and say, wow, that did make a difference, right? So I usually say stick with it for a while. If you're going to give it a try, stick with it, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. But it becomes a problem if we need to adjust traditional medicines, right? So, again, we say give it a try, but we may have to, do something in the interim.
Got it. Yeah, I do know that we surveyed the Parkinson's community a couple years ago, asking their experience with medical cannabis. And what was interesting is we found a lot of people tried it, but a lot of people also stopped using it because they, for various reasons, didn't find it as effective as they had hoped for that. And thinking about why people try this, you had that nice slide which showed different things. People were looking about more holistic, big picture stuff. But do you find, and this is a question from one of our listeners, Wayne, do you see specific symptoms as a trigger for people to try complementary medicine? Particularly, pain is one of those more intractable issues with Parkinson's.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as I mentioned, holistic and looking, but a lot of it is over time. People have these things, and whether part of it is aging and part of it is Parkinson's disease, there are symptoms that just don't get covered with a lot of the therapies that we have available, both Parkinson's treatment as well as, pain management, sleep issues that are so prevalent as we get older, constipation issues, right? And so, when our therapies aren't there, or we've tried them and they've given people side effects, or we've reached a ceiling, that's where a lot of people turn to some of these. And I do, like I mentioned, the mind and body practices, I think that's probably the one area that I promote the most. I'm actually a consumer of that. I find it very useful. I have a bunch of free apps that I have on my phone to help with mindfulness meditation. I do yoga, dabbled in Tai Chi and Qigong. So those are the areas where I think really help people with pain, with stress reduction, can help with sleep, can sometimes help people focus a little bit more. But yeah, I think it's those symptoms like that: pain, sleep, stress, focus, mental fog. These are the things that sometimes we don't get at with our conventional medicines that people turn to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just alert our listeners that we every Monday we have a Mindfulness Mondays hosted
Oh,
in a
wonderful.
similar, format. Thank you for saying so. And we're way past our time. I appreciate it. But just if I can give you some shotgun questions real quick,
Yeah.
rapid fire, if I may. So we talked here. We're talking about Parkinson's disease, but people have atypical Parkinson's. These apply, this applies to them as well, right? You would
Yeah,
say.
these are across the board. These are not specific for Parkinson's. They've really been studied. The ones that have been studied have been looking, trying to single out just Parkinson's disease, as far as we know, right? A lot of these studies don't go through some of the same criteria that we do for pharmaceutical trials, where we really try to isolate out real just Parkinson's and not some of these other Parkinson's conditions. So we don't know if those are in there. But these are general therapies, right? So they really are therapies that not only Parkinson's patients, atypical Parkinson's patients in the general community also can try.
Fantastic. And another question's come in about functional medicine. I'm not familiar with that term. Is that different than integrative medicine or complementary medicine? Are you familiar with that term?
I'm not sure. I'm wondering if they're talking about functional foods, when we talk about things like Macona and actually food stuffs, protein and, things like that. These are actual foods and not supplements that people take. I don't know if the listener was referring to that, functional foods rather than functional medicine.
Okay. And then one last one, if I may. Reflexology. You mentioned that in one of your slides. A
Mhm.
question has come in about what is it. I'm not familiar with it either. What is reflexology, if, briefly?
Yeah, again, it's one of those manipulative practices, right? Where you actually have a practitioner that sort of there's certain areas of the body. And this again, this is an ancient practice. There are books that date back to I don't know when, where, touching and pressing, similar to acupuncture, but not acupressure, but there's certain areas of the body that seem to help, at least by ancient texts, release digestion, improve digestion, help sleep, all those sort of things. They're pressure areas that release some of these body flow of energies and have traditionally in ancient texts help. I don't know that there's a lot of evidence to them. If you think about them, they're same to a lot of these, mind body practices and manipulative practices. I'm sure they help with pain. They help with stress relief. Anytime you have one human touching another human in areas where you've got stress and discomfort, it can be useful. So I think if people want to try it and they're going to places that are clean and have a reputation, I have no qualms about it. I just don't know that there's a lot of literature on it.
Yeah, understood. Dr. Natalie Diaz, thank you very much for your time today. Wonderful presentation. And I also want to turn this over and say thanks to our community. Really appreciate you taking the time to tune in and to listen to our presentation today. This closes on 2 of 6 that we've presentations for 2022. Look forward to April 6th, Parkinson's Awareness Month, about whether we can put the brakes on progression for Parkinson's disease with Dr. Lazarus. We have discussed a lot of different resources and material that Dr. Diaz mentioned some in her slides. Again, those slides are available for download, so you can take a look at that. And also have our own Aware and Care Kit, something for people to keep in mind as they consider visits to the hospital. We have a library, extensive resources, and our PD Health at Home series, where you can find out about our Mindful Mondays. And then we also have some other materials, digital ones like this, podcast, Substantial Matters, which is really fantastic for those who like to listen to it. And for those who don't know what a podcast is, it's basically the radio on the internet. You can download and listen to it when you want to. We have professional education. So for those allied health professionals who joined us, we've just launched CME programs. So certainly take a look at that for those of you who are interested in it, particularly in genetics and Parkinson's. Speaking of which, PD Generation is our large study that we're looking to test as many people as we can understand whether they have a genetic basis to their disease. And the hope here is that we'll have enough people who are identified and be willing when the time comes, which we think will be soon, where people can participate in clinical trials that are targeting people with specific genetic forms of Parkinson's disease. That said, we are here for you. Parkinsons.org, 24/7. And during business hours, we have our helpline, 1-800-4PD-INFO. If people are busy, they return calls. So feel free to leave a message. They will call you back. Also, helpline at Parkinsons.org. And last, before we go and fade to black, when this Zoom call is over, a window will open up from your browser. It's an opportunity for you to give feedback to the foundation, feedback to Dr. Diaz. Let us know how we did. Give us feedback. We take it, we listen to it, and incorporate it to always make certain that we're bringing you the best material that's possible. With that, I will bid everyone adieu and look forward to talking to you again in April. And hopefully the spring will be warm for everybody. Thanks again, and until next time.